Respect is rarely lost in one dramatic moment. It usually disappears quietly, through a pattern that people learn to recognize. You explain your limits, they cross them, you forgive them, and life continues exactly as before. Then they do it again. A little more disrespect, a little more pressure, a little more testing, and eventually, your words begin to carry less weight because your actions have taught people that your boundaries can be crossed without real consequences. This is where the psychology of respect becomes far more interesting than most people realize. People pay attention to what you tolerate. They watch how quickly you react. They notice how much you explain. They remember whether your warnings lead to action or simply lead to another conversation. And once a person discovers that your boundaries can be pushed without losing access to you, they have learned an important rule about the relationship. They have learned where your limits actually are. That is why this video is going to challenge the way you think about respect. The goal is never to become aggressive. It is never to become intimidating for the sake of appearing powerful. It is never about making people feel unsafe around you. Real psychological strength works differently. It comes from becoming so clear, so consistent, and so emotionally controlled that you understand one simple fact. Crossing your boundaries changes what happens next. That is the difference between demanding respect and creating an environment where disrespect has consequences. And this distinction can completely change the way people respond to you. There is a powerful psychological principle behind this. Human beings learn from patterns. A single statement can be forgotten. A repeated behavior becomes evidence. When your words and actions consistently match, people begin to predict your behavior. They learn that when you say a conversation is over, you actually end it. When you say a certain behavior is unacceptable, you respond accordingly. When you decide to step away, you step away. Your power comes from consistency rather than volume. In this video, you are going to learn 7 psychological principles that can change the way you handle disrespect without losing your composure or your dignity. You will learn why emotional reactions can give difficult people more control than you realize. You will learn how calmness can become a form of authority. You will discover why clearly identifying disrespect is more effective than attacking someone's character. You will understand why over-explaining your boundaries can quietly turn them into negotiations. You will learn how consequences create meaning behind your words, why access to your time and attention should be treated as valuable, and how consistent behavior can change the way people perceive you over time. You will also learn when walking away becomes more powerful than winning an argument. But there is a deeper lesson underneath all 7 principles. Respect is rarely created by convincing someone that you deserve it. It grows when your behavior shows that you respect yourself enough to act when your limits are crossed. This is where many people make their biggest mistake. They believe respect comes from being tougher, louder, colder, or more dominant. So they raise their voice, make threats, they try to intimidate, they attempt to prove that they are powerful. Yet psychological strength can look completely different. A person can speak quietly and still be taken seriously. A person can remain calm while everyone else becomes emotional. A person can refuse an argument without appearing weak. A person can walk away without announcing it 10 times. And a person can remove access without revenge, humiliation, or drama. That kind of behavior sends a much stronger message because it reveals self-control. There is also a lesser-known part of this psychology. People often discover your real boundaries through your response after the boundary has been crossed. Your first warning tells them what you want. Your next action tells them what you mean. This is why repeating the same warning again and again can produce the opposite effect. Every empty warning teaches the other person that your words can be ignored. Every consequence you consistently follow through on teaches them that your words have weight. This does not mean every disagreement deserves punishment. It means your response should match the behavior. A small misunderstanding may require communication. A repeated pattern may require distance. Serious disrespect may require ending access altogether. The important part is that you stop confusing communication with endless negotiation. You are allowed to explain yourself, but you do not have to spend your life proving that your feelings are valid. You are allowed to forgive, but forgiveness does not require unlimited access. You are allowed to care about someone while deciding that certain behavior has no place in your life. And once you understand that distinction, the entire psychology of respect begins to change. You stop chasing approval. You stop trying to force people to understand your value. You stop turning every disagreement into a battle for the last word. Instead, you become more deliberate. You observe patterns. You control your reactions. You communicate clearly. Then you allow your actions to speak. Stay with this video until the end, because the final principle connects everything together. It explains why walking away can sometimes create more psychological impact than confrontation, and why the strongest response to disrespect may involve giving the other person less of you, rather than giving them more of your anger. By the end, you will understand why people often test boundaries before they consciously admit they are doing it, why emotional reactions can weaken your position, and why consistency can make your presence far more powerful. Most importantly, you will learn how to create consequences without becoming cruel, aggressive, or consumed by conflict. Because the real objective is simple. You do not need everyone to fear you. You need people to understand that access to you comes with standards. Your time has value. Your attention has value. Your trust has value. Your presence has value. When someone repeatedly treats those things carelessly, you have the ability to change the level of access they receive. That is where genuine confidence begins. And the most powerful principle in this entire video may also be the simplest. Stop teaching people that your boundaries are negotiable. Once you understand that, disrespect starts looking very different. It becomes less about what another person says, and more about what you choose to allow afterward. So stay with me, because these 7 principles will show you how to become calmer, clearer, and harder to disrespect without becoming the kind of person you once needed to protect yourself from. Welcome to our channel, where we break down human psychology, emotional control, social behavior, and the hidden patterns that shape relationships. If you want to understand people while becoming stronger in the way you handle them, subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because this is where the deeper psychology begins. The first place disrespect tries to take control is inside your nervous system. A rude comment, a dismissive tone, an insult, or a deliberate attempt to provoke you can create an instant emotional reaction before you have even decided how you want to respond. Your body becomes tense, your thoughts become faster, your attention locks onto the person and the offense. Anger creates urgency. It tells you that you need to respond immediately, defend yourself, prove your point, or make the other person understand what they have done. But this is exactly where emotional self-regulation becomes powerful. When someone disrespects you and you immediately lose control, you may believe you are showing strength, yet you are also giving the other person control over your emotional state. They pushed a button and you reacted. They changed your mood and you followed them into the emotional space they created. This is why some people repeatedly provoke others. They are less interested in the original disagreement and more interested in discovering how easily they can control the reaction. The moment you understand this pattern, your response begins to change. You stop treating every provocation as an emergency. You create a small space between what happened and what you decide to do next. That space is where your authority lives. Instead of raising your voice, you slow it down. Instead of rushing to defend yourself, you listen carefully. Instead of explaining every emotion running through your mind, you choose a few clear words. This does not mean becoming passive or allowing disrespect to continue. Assertiveness works best when your message is direct, controlled, and specific. You can do not speak to me that way without turning the moment into a shouting match. You can say, I am willing to discuss this when we can speak respectfully, and then refuse to continue the argument. You can also decide that the conversation has reached its limit and step away. The important part is that your response comes from a decision rather than an impulse. There is a subtle psychological shift here. When your emotions control your behavior, the other person can often predict you. They know which words will make you angry. They know how far they can push before you explode. They know that provoking you will keep your attention locked on them. But when you become emotionally disciplined, that predictability disappears. You become harder to manipulate because your reactions are chosen instead of triggered. This is where many people misunderstand calmness. They think a calm person has surrendered. In reality, calmness can give you more control over the conversation because you can still think while the other person is reacting. You can notice their tone, You can recognize patterns. You can decide whether the issue deserves a response at all. Sometimes the strongest response is a slower voice, fewer words, and a clear decision. You do not need to match someone's aggression to prove that you are strong. You do not need to become louder to make your boundary real. Your emotional control is part of your authority because it shows that another person's behavior does not automatically dictate your behavior. And once you stop giving people instant emotional access to you, the entire dynamic begins to shift. The person who expected an explosion may suddenly find silence. The person who expected a long defense may receive one calm sentence. The person who expected you to chase the argument that you have already decided where your attention belongs. That change creates a different kind of interaction because now the other person has to deal with your boundary instead of your emotional reaction. And that is where the next psychological principle becomes even more important: knowing exactly what behavior crossed the line. Once you have learned to control your emotional reaction, the next step is learning how to identify the exact behavior that crossed the line. This is where boundary clarity becomes powerful. Many people know they feel disrespected, but they struggle to explain what actually happened. Their emotions take over the conversation, and instead of describing the behavior, they attack the entire character of the other person. They say things like, "You always disrespect me," "You never care about me," or "You have no respect for anyone." These statements may express real frustration, but they create another problem. They turn a specific situation into an argument about someone's entire personality. The other person can immediately begin defending themselves. They can point to one example where they were respectful. They can argue about whether they always behave that way. They can focus on the accusation instead of the behavior that caused the problem. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about the boundary. It becomes a debate about who is right. A clear approach is much more direct. Identify what happened. Say, "You spoke to me disrespectfully." Say, "That comment crossed a line." Say, I am willing to discuss this when the conversation is respectful." Notice how different these statements feel. They do not require a long emotional explanation. They do not attack someone's identity. They identify an action and communicate the standard you expect. This matters because specific communication gives people less room to claim confusion. When your boundary is vague, the other person can interpret it however they want. When your boundary is specific, the message becomes easier to understand. This is one reason effective boundaries are usually clear, realistic, and communicated directly. You are telling someone exactly which behavior creates a problem and what you will do if that behavior continues. There is also a deeper psychological advantage to speaking this way. You keep yourself focused on observable behavior rather than assumptions about someone's intentions. You may believe the person wanted to humiliate you, control you, or provoke you, but you cannot always know their internal motive. You can know what they said. You can know what they did. You can know how you choose to respond. That keeps the conversation grounded in reality. It also makes you harder to pull into unnecessary arguments. A person may deny their intention, but it becomes much harder to deny the exact words or behavior you are addressing. This approach also protects your credibility. When you describe a specific action, instead of making sweeping accusations, your communication sounds more controlled and reasonable. You are showing that you are paying attention to behavior rather than search for reasons to attack. And when the same behavior happens repeatedly, the pattern becomes even clearer. You do not need to announce that someone is a bad person. You simply recognize that a certain behavior is unacceptable to you and respond accordingly. That distinction is important because a boundary is about controlling your own participation rather than controlling another person's entire personality. You cannot force someone to become respectful. You can communicate what you will accept and decide what you will do when that standard is ignored. This is where many people become uncomfortable, because clear boundaries remove the emotional fog from difficult interactions. Instead of arguing about intentions, you can focus on behavior. Instead of saying, "Why are you treating me like this?" you can say, "I will continue the conversation when you speak respectfully." Instead of trying to prove that you deserve better treatment, you communicate the standard and allow your actions to support it. The more precise your communication becomes, the less energy you waste defending yourself. And once your boundary has been stated clearly, Another challenge appears because even a perfectly communicated boundary can lose its power when you spend the next 20 minutes explaining why you deserve to have it. One of the fastest ways to weaken a boundary is to turn it into a long explanation. You finally tell someone that their behavior crossed a line, but instead of stopping there, you begin defending the reason behind your decision. You explain why the comment hurt you. You explain what you were going through that day. You explain your intentions. You explain your past experiences. You explain why you reacted the way you did. Then you explain again because the other person still seems unconvinced. At that point, the conversation is quietly changed. You are no longer communicating a boundary. You are trying to convince another person that your boundary is reasonable. This is where defensive communication can become a trap. The more details you provide, the more material the other person has to challenge. They can argue with your explanation. They can question your intentions. They can tell you that you misunderstood. They can focus on one small detail and ignore the behavior that started the conversation. Soon, you are defending yourself in a courtroom that only exists because you agreed to enter it. A stronger approach is much simpler. State the boundary clearly. Give a brief explanation when it is useful. Then stop. You can say, "I am willing to talk, but I will not continue while you are speaking to me disrespectfully." You do not need 5 additional paragraphs explaining why respect matters. The boundary already communicates the standard. This does not mean you should become cold or refuse every conversation. Healthy communication still requires listening, clarification, and mutual understanding. The difference is that you stop treating your personal limits like a proposal that requires approval. Assertive communication is generally built around direct expression of needs, limits, and feelings while maintaining respect for the other person. Passive communication hides the boundary, while aggressive communication attempts to force it through pressure. Assertiveness sits between these extremes. It allows you to speak clearly without turning the interaction into a battle. This is especially important when someone is trying to pull you into endless justification. They may ask, "Why are you so sensitive?" They may say you are overreacting. They may demand that you prove your feelings. If you continue explaining every detail, the conversation can move farther and farther away from the original behavior. You can answer briefly, "You do not have to agree with my boundary, but I am still going to follow it." That sentence changes the entire dynamic because it removes the need for permission. You are no longer asking the other person to validate your decision before you act on it. You are communicating your position and taking responsibility for what happens next. There is also a powerful psychological reason brevity matters. When you speak less, you leave fewer openings for unnecessary arguments. Your message becomes easier to understand, your behavior becomes easier to predict, and your attention stays focused on the actual issue instead of getting lost inside a debate. People who are used to controlling conversations through pressure may become frustrated when they discover that you are no longer providing endless explanations. They may push harder. They may ask more questions. They may accuse you of being difficult. This is where consistency matters. You do not need to become defensive simply because someone dislikes your boundary. Their disagreement does not automatically make your boundary unreasonable. Your responsibility is to communicate it clearly and decide what you will do when it is ignored. The goal is not to win every conversation. The goal is to make your position understood without surrendering control of the conversation. And once you stop over-explaining, you begin to see another important truth about boundaries. Words alone have limited power when your actions never change after those words are spoken. A boundary becomes powerful when your behavior gives it meaning. You can tell someone that disrespect is unacceptable, but the real lesson comes from what happens after they cross the line. This is where behavioral conditioning and contingency become important. People learn from patterns. They observe what happens after their actions, and over time, those patterns influence what they expect to happen next. If someone repeatedly insults you, ignores your limits, or speaks to you with contempt, yet continues receiving the same access to your time, attention, energy, and presence, there may be little reason for the behavior to change. Your words are saying one thing, while your actions are teaching another. This is why a boundary without follow-through can become little more than a request. The difference between a threat and consequence is especially important here. A threat is designed to frighten someone. It often sounds dramatic, emotional, and personal. Do that again, and I will destroy you. That statement creates conflict because it challenges the other person's ego and invites a battle. A consequence works differently. It describes what you will do to protect your own boundary. If you continue speaking to me this way, I will end the conversation. There is no need for intimidation. There is no need to threaten revenge. There is no need to prove that you are more powerful. You simply communicate what your next action will be, and then you follow through. If the disrespect continues, end the conversation. If someone repeatedly invades your time, reduce your availability. If a person consistently violates a reasonable boundary, create distance. The important part is that the consequence should be realistic and within your control. You cannot control whether another person changes. You can control whether you continue participating in the same situation. This is where many people accidentally weaken themselves. They announce consequences while angry, make promises they cannot maintain, and then return to the same pattern a few hours later. The other person learns that the warning carries little weight. Over time, repeated empty warnings can become predictable. A calm consequence creates a different pattern. You state it once. You remain composed. You give the other person the opportunity to adjust. If the behavior continues, you act. No shouting, no revenge, no dramatic announcement. Just follow through. That consistency is what gives your boundary psychological weight. It also protects you from becoming trapped in constant confrontation, because you no longer need to fight every battle verbally. Your actions communicate the limit. There is a deeper principle here. Consequences should protect your peace rather than punish another person. Ending a conversation is different from humiliating someone. Taking distance is different from trying to destroy their reputation. Reducing access is different from seeking revenge. The purpose is to change your participation in an unhealthy pattern. When you approach consequences this way, you become less emotionally dependent on the other person's reaction. They may become angry. They may complain. They may accuse you of being unfair. They may test the boundary again. You still have a choice. You can remain calm and continue with the action you already communicated. This is why the consequence teaches more than the warning. A warning tells someone what you want to happen. A consistent consequence shows them what actually happens when the boundary is crossed. And once people begin to understand that your words are followed by predictable actions, they start learning a new rule about interacting with you. Your attention, time, and emotional energy are no longer guaranteed regardless of how they behave. And that naturally leads to another powerful part of the psychology, the value of access to you. Your attention is one of the most valuable resources you have, yet many people give it away as if it has no limit. They answer every message immediately. They solve every problem. They remain available at every hour. They keep giving chances even after someone has repeatedly ignored their boundaries. Over time, this can create an unhealthy pattern where another person expects access to your time, attention, emotional energy, and support regardless of how they behave. This is where the psychology of availability and perceived value becomes important. People naturally notice what is consistently available and what requires greater effort to access. When your attention is always guaranteed, someone may begin to treat it as an automatic resource rather than something connected to mutual respect. This does not mean you should play games, deliberately ignore people to make them anxious, or pretend to be busy when you are available. That turns self-respect into manipulation. The healthier approach is much simpler. Your level of access should reflect the quality of the relationship and the way you are being treated. When someone repeatedly disrespects you, you can reduce the amount of time, attention, and emotional energy you invest in that relationship. You do not need to announce it dramatically. You simply change your behavior. You stop replying instantly every time they demand attention. You stop solving every problem they create. You stop making yourself available whenever they suddenly need something. You stop giving unlimited chances while receiving the same disrespect in return. This creates a very different psychological dynamic because your behavior communicates a clear standard without requiring a long speech. Access to you comes with standards. Your time has limits. Your attention has limits. Your emotional energy has limits. When someone treats those resources carelessly, you are allowed to protect them. The important part is that scarcity here should come from healthy priorities, rather than calculated manipulation. You are not withholding attention to punish someone. You are choosing where your attention belongs. You are building a life where your entire emotional world does not revolve around one person's behavior. That independence changes the way you carry yourself. You become less desperate for approval because you have other priorities, responsibilities, relationships, and goals competing for your attention. This is where many people experience a major psychological shift. Instead of asking, how can I make this person value me? You begin asking, does this relationship deserve this much access to me? That question puts your attention back where it belongs. You are no longer trying to convince someone that you are valuable. You are observing their behavior and allowing that behavior to influence your level of investment. Someone who consistently treats you with respect receives more trust, more openness, and more access over time. Someone who repeatedly crosses boundaries receives less. This creates a natural connection between behavior and access. There is also an important difference between being available and being dependable. You can be a reliable person without being constantly accessible. You can care about someone without answering every demand. You can support people without becoming responsible for every problem in their lives. You can love someone while still protecting your emotional space. These distinctions become especially important when a person has become accustomed to receiving unlimited access. The moment you begin setting limits, they may notice the change and question it. They may ask why you are different. They may expect the old level of attention to return. Your answer does not need to be defensive. Your behavior can simply reflect your priorities. Over time, people learn that your presence is valuable because it is connected to mutual respect rather than guaranteed regardless of how they treat you. And once you stop giving unlimited access to people who repeatedly violate your boundaries, another transformation begins. Because the next step is learning how to make your words and actions so consistent that people understand you mean what you say. Authority is rarely created by one powerful speech. It is built through repeated evidence. People watch what you do after you say something, and over time, those observations become expectations. This is where behavioral consistency and social perception become extremely important. If you tell someone that a certain behavior is unacceptable, but continue accepting it every time it happens, your actions eventually become more convincing than your words. If you say you are leaving a disrespectful conversation and then remain there arguing for another hour, people learn that your boundary can be stretched. If you promise to change your availability but immediately return to the same pattern, people learn that your statement is temporary. But when your behavior consistently matches your words, people begin to form a very different expectation about you. They learn that you mean what you say. This does not require intimidation. It does not require acting cold or pretending to be powerful. It requires consistency. If you make a commitment, keep it. If you give your word, respect it. If you establish a reasonable boundary, enforce it. If you say you are going to step away from a disrespectful conversation, step away. These small moments may seem insignificant, but repeated over time, they create a reputation. People begin to understand how you operate because your behavior becomes predictable. That predictability can create trust with respectful people and caution among people who are accustomed to testing boundaries. There is an important distinction here. Predictability does not mean becoming rigid. Life changes, circumstances change, and sometimes you need to reconsider a decision. Consistency means your actions generally match the standards you communicate. You are not changing your position simply because someone becomes angry, applies pressure, or tries to make you feel guilty. This is where assertive behavior can strengthen self-respect as well. When you repeatedly act according to your values, you begin to trust yourself more. You learn that you can handle uncomfortable situations without abandoning your own standards. That internal trust eventually becomes visible in the way you communicate. Your voice becomes steadier because you are no longer trying to convince people that you are serious. Your decisions become cleaner because you have already decided what you will accept. You stop making dramatic declarations because your history already speaks for you. Think about the difference between someone who says, "I will leave if you continue speaking to me this way," and someone who calmly ends the conversation when the behavior continues. The second person does not need to repeat the warning. The action becomes the message. Over time, people collect these moments. They remember that you followed through. They remember that you kept your commitments. They remember that you did not collapse under pressure. This is how social perception develops. People create expectations based on repeated interactions, and your consistent behavior becomes part of the way they understand you. That is far more powerful than constantly trying to appear intimidating. Intimidation can create a temporary reaction. Consistency creates a lasting reputation. And once people know that your words are connected to predictable actions, you gain another form of strength. You no longer need to fight for authority in every conversation, because your past behavior has already established the standard. The next question becomes much harder, though, because even strong consistency has limits. And there are moments when continuing to engage with disrespect only gives the pattern more opportunities to continue. There comes a point when another conversation will no longer solve the problem because the problem is no longer a misunderstanding. One mistake does not always define a person. People lose their temper. People make poor decisions. People misunderstand each other. People can recognize their behavior, apologize, and make a genuine effort to change. Healthy relationships have room for mistakes because respect does not require perfection. The real warning sign appears when the same disrespect keeps returning after the issue has already been communicated clearly. You explained the behavior. You stated the boundary. You gave the person an opportunity to adjust. Yet the same pattern continues. At that stage, strategic disengagement becomes important. You stop trying to convince. You stop trying to win every argument. You stop trying to force another person to understand your value. You begin paying attention to the pattern rather than the promise. This is a major psychological shift because arguments can create the illusion that one more explanation will finally produce a breakthrough. You may think that if you find the perfect words, speak with enough emotion, or present enough evidence, the other person will suddenly understand. But some people already understand the boundary. Their continued behavior simply shows that they have chosen to ignore it. That is when your responsibility changes. Your job is no longer to make them agree with you. Your job is to decide how much access they continue to receive. You can reduce contact. You can create distance. You can stop participating in conversations that repeatedly become disrespectful. You can leave when the interaction becomes unhealthy. Sometimes walking away is more powerful than staying and fighting, because it removes the attention that keeps the conflict alive. You are refusing to turn your self-respect into a competition. You are also refusing to make another person's approval the condition for your peace. This does not mean cutting everyone off after one disagreement or using distance as a punishment. Strategic disengagement requires judgment. Look for patterns. Look at whether the person takes responsibility. Look at whether their behavior changes after communication. Look at whether apologies are followed by different actions or simply followed by another cycle of disrespect. A sincere apology can be meaningful when it is supported by changed behavior. Repeated apologies without change can become part of the pattern itself. The important question is always what happens next. If you decide to walk away, you do not need a dramatic announcement. You can simply end the conversation. You can leave the environment when appropriate. You can reduce your involvement. You can stop responding to provocations. And when a situation involves threats, intimidation, or a genuine risk to your safety, the priority is protection rather than confrontation. Seek appropriate support and choose the safest available option. There is tremendous freedom in accepting that you cannot control another person's character, choices, or level of respect. You cannot force someone to value you. You cannot force someone to communicate maturely. You cannot force someone to treat your boundaries seriously. But you can control your own participation. You can decide where your time goes. You can decide who receives your attention. You can decide which conversations deserve your energy. You can decide when enough is enough. That decision becomes especially powerful when it is made calmly rather than impulsively. You are no longer walking away to make someone chase you. You are walking away because remaining in the same patterns costs more than leaving it. And once you understand that distinction, walking away stops being an attempt to control another person and becomes an act of controlling your own life. The deepest change begins when you stop making other people's behavior the measure of your worth. At first, the desire for respect can seem completely reasonable. You want people to treat you well. You want your words to matter. You want your boundaries to be recognized. But there is a hidden problem when your emotional stability depends on whether another person respects you. You can spend your entire life trying to control reactions that belong to other people. You become focused on proving your value, correcting people's opinions, defending yourself, and demanding treatment that should never require endless persuasion. The 7 rules lead toward a different psychological position. You communicate clearly because you respect your own voice. You stay calm because you refuse to hand control of your emotions to another person. You stop over-explaining because you understand that every boundary does not require a courtroom defense. You enforce boundaries because your words need to be supported by action. You protect your time because you understand that your attention is limited. You follow through because consistency teaches both other people and yourself that your decisions have meaning. And when necessary, you walk away because remaining in a destructive pattern simply to prove your strength can become another form of dependence. The transformation happens internally before anyone else notices it. You stop waking up and asking, "How do I make them respect me?" Instead, you begin asking a much more powerful question. What behavior am I willing to accept? That question changes your focus completely. The first question gives another person control over your emotional state because your goal depends on their reaction. The second question returns control to you. You cannot decide whether someone respects you. You can decide whether their behavior continues to receive your time, attention, trust, and presence. You cannot force someone to understand your value. You can decide whether you continue investing in someone who repeatedly ignores it. You cannot control whether another person becomes mature, considerate, or accountable. You can control how closely you remain involved with their behavior. This is the difference between demanding respect and living with self-respect. A person who constantly demands respect can become trapped in endless battles because every insult feels like a challenge that must be answered. A self-respecting person does not need to respond to every challenge. They observe, they communicate, they make decisions, they act. Their strength becomes quieter because it no longer depends on performance. They do not need to convince everyone that they are powerful. Their behavior provides the evidence. This also creates a powerful form of internal trust. Every time you say you will protect your boundary and actually protect it, you teach yourself that your own decisions can be trusted. Every time you stay calm during provocation, you strengthen your ability to regulate your emotions. Every time you walk away from a destructive argument instead of chasing the last word, you reinforce the idea that your peace has value. Slowly, respect becomes less about how others treat you and more about how consistently you treat yourself. You begin to understand that self-respect is not an attitude you announce. It is a pattern you live. And when that pattern becomes strong enough, you stop trying to make people afraid of disrespecting you because you have already created the more important condition. You have become someone who will calmly remove yourself from situations where disrespect becomes standard. There are behaviors that can quietly destroy the authority you have spent so much time building, and many of them look powerful in the moment. The first is exploding in anger. When you lose control, your message can disappear behind your emotion. People may remember your shouting more than the boundary you were trying to communicate. Anger can be real and understandable, but allowing it to control your behavior gives the situation control over you. The second mistake is making empty threats. Telling someone that there will be consequences and then doing nothing teaches them that your warnings have little meaning. A smaller, realistic consequence that you actually enforce carries far more weight than a dramatic threat you never follow through on. The third mistake is giving endless second chances. Forgiveness can be healthy, but unlimited access without changed behavior can create a repeating pattern. When the same boundary is crossed again and again, another explanation may simply create another opportunity for the pattern to continue. The fourth mistake is over-explaining your boundaries. You do not need to build an entire legal case for every personal limit. Clear communication is stronger when you can state what happened, explain what you will accept, and then allow your actions to support the message. The fifth mistake is trying to embarrass the other person. Public humiliation may create a temporary feeling of victory, but it often turns a boundary issue into an ego battle. Now both people are trying to defeat each other rather than solve the actual problem. The sixth mistake is seeking revenge. Revenge keeps your attention attached to the person who disrespected you. You may believe you are taking your power back, while your thoughts and actions remain centered around them. Real authority gives you the freedom to move forward without needing to hurt someone in return. The seventh mistake is acting intimidating when insecurity is driving the behavior. Loudness, threats, aggressive body language, or constant attempts to appear dangerous can create fear. But fear alone is a fragile foundation. People may comply temporarily while losing trust and respect at the same time. The eighth mistake is setting consequences you refuse to enforce. Every time you announce a boundary and abandon it under pressure, you teach people that persistence can defeat your limits. This is why aggression and assertiveness must be separated. Aggression tries to control another person through hostility, pressure, or intimidation. Assertiveness communicates your needs and limits directly while still recognizing that the other person has their own rights and choices. You can be firm without being cruel. You can disagree without humiliating someone. You can leave a conversation without turning it into a threat. You can protect your time without trying to punish another person. Healthy assertiveness is powerful because it keeps your behavior under your control. You are responsible for what you say, what you accept, and what you do next. That creates a very different kind of authority. Instead of trying to make people afraid of your anger, you become confident in your ability to respond when your boundaries are crossed. Instead of creating fear through intimidation, you create clarity through consistency. Instead of trying to dominate every interaction, you decide which interactions deserve your participation. Over time, this distinction becomes visible. People can sense when someone is performing strength and when someone has developed genuine self-control. The first depends on proving something. The second depends on having nothing to prove. And when your authority comes from self-control rather than aggression, the final lesson becomes much clearer. The goal was never to make people fear you as a person, but to make disrespecting your boundaries a choice that naturally comes with consequences. Real power begins when you stop trying to make people afraid of you and start becoming someone who respects themselves enough to enforce their own standards. Think back to the title of this video, How to Make People Fear Disrespecting You. The answer was never aggression. It was never intimidation. It was never becoming louder, colder, or more dangerous. The real answer is much quieter and far more powerful. Make disrespect expensive through your decisions, not through your anger. Stay calm when someone tries to provoke you. Speak clearly when a boundary is crossed. Stop over-explaining yourself to people who have already understood your position. Protect your time because your attention is valuable. Set boundaries that you can actually enforce. Follow through when those boundaries are ignored. And when respect becomes a repeated pattern of disrespect, have the strength to walk away. These actions send a message that words alone can never communicate. They show people that your standards are real because your behavior supports them. You do not need to announce your strength every time someone crosses a line. You do not need to threaten anyone. You do not need revenge. You simply need to become consistent enough that people understand there is a difference between having access to you and having unlimited access to you. The deeper psychological lesson is that you cannot control whether another person respects you. You cannot control their maturity, their attitude, their intentions, or their choices, but you can control what you tolerate. You can control how you respond. You can control where your time goes, where your attention goes, and who receives your trust. That is where self-respect becomes real. The goal is never to become someone people are afraid of. The goal is to become someone who no longer accepts behavior that destroys their self-respect. When your words match your actions, people learn. When your boundaries have consequences, people adapt. And when someone refuses to adapt, they lose access to you. That is real power. It is calm. It is disciplined. It does not need an audience. It does not need constant approval. It does not need to prove itself through anger. Your greatest advantage is the ability to remain in control of yourself when someone else is trying to take control of your emotions. So the next time someone crosses a line, remember this. You do not have to win the argument. You do not have to get the last word. You do not have to make them regret disrespecting you. You simply have to decide what happens next. That decision is yours. And when you consistently choose your dignity over drama, your peace over revenge, and your self-respect over approval, you become very difficult to manipulate. If this video gave you a new perspective on respect, boundaries, emotional control, and personal power, make sure you like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you want more videos about human psychology, emotional strength, confidence, and the hidden patterns behind people's behavior, subscribe to the channel and turn this into a place which you come back to whenever you want to understand people and understand yourself on a deeper level. Remember, respect does not begin with making other people fear you. It begins with becoming someone who knows their value, protects their peace, and has the courage to walk away when that value is repeatedly ignored. That is the kind of power nobody can give you.